Hey everybody, welcome to Saturday Night SQL Virtual Group webinar. My name is Sarah Huang. I'm the founder and organizer of this virtual group. Join me here is Debbie Huang, our co-organizer. Today, Jim Miller will present Populating a Data Warehouse with SSIS and BimlSnap. Jim has worked in various facets of the IT business for over 30 years, with a primary focus on data warehousing, reporting, and analytics, business intelligence, data modeling, ETL frameworks, database architecture, SDLC, subject-oriented analysis and design, as well as database performance tuning. In previous engagements, Jim has fulfilled roles as data architect, DBA, IT director, and senior consultant. He also has experience in account management, marketing, technical support, and software application training. Jim has also had some extraordinary opportunity to lead IT organizations with multinational participants on reconstruction projects based in Bosnia as part of the Dayton Peace Agreement, and more recently in Iraq with the U.S. Department of State. His specialties are ETL or ELT development powered by BimlSnap, complete Microsoft SQL Server BI Stack, Snowflake Cloud Database. We really appreciate Jim sharing his knowledge with us on a Saturday night. Let me first take care of the few housekeeping stuff, then transfer screen over to Jim. The PASS Marathon will take place on November 28th. This virtual event will consider the ways in which business make decisions and stay ahead of the game. You'll learn how to best leverage your data and harness its potential through discovery, interpretation, prediction, storytelling, and meaningful data visuals. And the event registration will launch on November 13th. And please help decide the future of PASS by casting your vote in the 2018 PASS elections, which starts in November the 7th. And this election will determine the new directors for the 2019-2020 term. And please share your feedback as a valued PASS member and complete the PASS membership survey for a chance to win $150 US. PASS is looking to connect with new sponsors, and if you know a company who will be willing to sponsor PASS, you'll get a $100 gift card for the referral. And also, if you need more information, please connect with the PASS sponsorship team. These are the upcoming virtual group webinars by different virtual group. And as you know already, PASS has many virtual groups in different languages, different topics. You may join as many as you would like. And the PASS membership is completely free. And this is the upcoming SQL Saturdays. And yeah, join PASS to grow your career. This is how you connect with the PASS through Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. This is how you may ask questions during our session. You may raise your hand if you like to interact directly with Jim by click this little hand sign, and one of us, either me or Debbie, will unmute you. Otherwise, you may type your question in the this chat window, then I'll read the question to Jim. All right, let me transfer screen over to Jim. All right, Jim, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Hello and welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Jim Miller. I'm a president and senior consultant for BI Tracks. We've been consulting for many years and have built dozens of data warehouses. And we have essentially taken the best practices and a variety of accelerators to building data warehouses and incorporated them into a product that's called BimlSnap. BimlSnap is actually mostly a public domain product, and you'll understand that in a little bit. You can certainly get started for free, and the essential part of BimlSnap is all database driven. And when you see the database, you'll understand that you actually, when you download the product, it's an MIT license. You can use it for free, and I think you'll find a tremendous amount of very valuable intellectual property built into BimlSnap. What we do sell is a front end to it, but for everybody on this line, we'll give a free 6-month usage of the front end. Again, it's optional, but it does give you some creature comforts. And if you want to use it for free beyond that, all you'd have to do is do some social media and tell people how you use the product, and we'll just extend that. So you can basically assume everything that you're going to see tonight is in fact free. So with that said, let me go ahead and get started. I'm assuming you can see my screen where it says, what is Biml? So if not, Sarah, please let me know. So what is Biml? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I can see it without any problem.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So Biml is nothing more than XML. It's an XML dialect. It was actually developed by Microsoft. It was part of what they call Project Vulkan. And you can even see remnants of Project Vulkan still on Codeplex. But about 7 years ago, Microsoft discontinued the project because the Power BI suite of products was in the works, and they weren't quite sure how long the BI stack of SSIS ISRs was going to live. Of course, it's going on in a very strong fashion for quite some time, continues today. But because they aborted the project, their chief architect, his name is Scott Curry, started a company called Verigent. And Verigent formally brought Biml to the marketplace, and they have a whole suite of Biml products. This product participates in that ecosystem, but in a database-centric way, and you'll see what I mean about that. So what you see on the right side of the screen is a sample Biml, where it is describing what the package will do once it's built. And you can see it's very readable. XML kind of delivers on the promise of XML, that it's both functional and human readable. But you take this Biml, and then using BimlExpress, which is a free add-in to SSIS, or sorry, the designer in SQL Server Data Tools for SSIS. And you simply right-click on the Biml file, and it generates true packages for you. And you'll see that in a demo in just a minute. So Biml is nothing more than XML, a specific dialect. Okay, why would you want to use Biml instead of the SSIS designer? Well, if you look at the building of a data warehouse, probably 75 to 80% of the effort in building a data warehouse is spent in the ETL or ELT part of a project. So if you're gonna bring your data warehouse to market sooner, if you're gonna deliver to your clients faster, you're probably gonna have to look at how efficient is your ELT, ETL processes in terms of developing for the data warehouse. And anybody who's worked in SSIS quite a bit understands there's a whole lot of point and click, drag and drop. So one of the things you miss is code reusability. And in fact, the Biml language, as envisioned by Microsoft, was to overcome that limitation throughout most of the BI stack. And so Microsoft has recognized quite some time ago that the most common coding software development technique of code reuse is not available in the designers for SSIS, SSR, SAS, etc. So that's one reason. And if you can start reusing code, then it becomes more efficient, more reliable. You start to come up with modularity or pieces that can be reusable. It's more predictable. So that's a very important part of Biml is you're using XML. XML is code, of course. Now you have code reuse, and you'll see how that plays out in just a minute. You can also define objects that SSIS use outside of SSIS. So what's the most common thing you start with in SSIS? It's a connection. And then you probably have parameters to configure that connection, then packages. Well, how do you reuse that outside of an SSIS project? Well, I suppose you could create a new project and then copy, import them over, but that's not really code reuse, that's code duplication. And so now you have two instances of it. Or you could start with project A and then make a copy of it, call it project B, but again, you've got the same problem. You're just duplicating code. So with Biml, you have the ability to define reusable objects outside of the scope of a specific SSIS project, and then make it reusable in one, many, 100 separate projects. It also helps with the standardization because the code is reusable. You follow patterns, and you'll see what I mean shortly with the patterns. You have a data flow pattern, execute SQL pattern, etc. Because of that, every package and all the projects start to look very much the same. In fact, they are very much the same, and they're very predictable. And when you start handing projects from one developer to another, they're not intimidated by, well, I don't know how this person created the package because it's all standardized. And the accelerated change management simply means that because you're using code reuse, you can regenerate your packages at any point in time. If you theoretically wanted to make a change to 100 packages, how do you do that? The same change. Maybe you want to start logging errors and have an event to catch an error that occurred or log it differently. We literally have to go into 100 different packages, drill into a point, click, drag, drop for each package and do it exactly the same. Very time consuming, very error prone, etc. Finally, Biml, because it's just simple text, it's XML, you can now do a simple diff with any text editor to compare one Biml to another and see exactly what the differences are without the noise of GUIDs and execution type information buried in a DTSX file. So all really good reasons to use Biml. So real quickly, I'm gonna switch over and hopefully you'll be able, this will work. Can everybody see Visual Studio at this point?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, good. All right, so you can see this is an empty project, and here's my Biml script. There's no connections, there's no packages. I'm going to double click on the Biml script, and you can see that it is defining this project. Now, if you look at this, you'll say, well, that's great, but who's going to sit here and write all this XML? Not to worry. We actually generate this XML for you completely from the backend database. And it really is nothing more than select for XML. But before I get into those details, just very quickly, this is Biml. The first thing it's going to do is define your connections. You can see there's 3 connections here. You can see the connections are also driven by expression. So at runtime, you can assign the server name, the database name. Then you get into the actual package project. And this is the name of the package. This is the metadata refresh. And it lists, these are the connections which are already defined in the project. Here's all the parameters in the project. Here's all the packages in the project. And then it just goes package by package to define what it does. So this particular package here, which is a data flow, and you can see the source select, and this will this has variables that are defined in it. It has events defined in it. And now here's the next package. Execute SQL. It'll show you the SQL that it executes. Again, all these standard variables, your events for logging errors, and then you get to the next package, et cetera, until you get to the very end. So that's really all that Biml is describing your connections, your parameters, your packages. But the interface now is Biml, and this is the big paradigm shift. So the question is, how do I generate this Biml? We'll get into that, but just so you know, after it's built, you use this add-in in Visual Studio that's called BimlExpress. This is a free add-in. It is from Verigence, and again, Verigence has a whole suite of Biml projects or products. And there's also a BIDS helper, which is a non-Verigence separate group has developed that does the very same thing. BimlExpress is a commercial product, which is why I use it, but there are other add-ins that will generate packages from Biml code. So anyway, perfectly blank project. I'm going to right click and choose generate. And this invokes what's called the Hadron engine, but it runs through all that XML and it creates all the connections and all the packages. So you can see the 3 connections are here, and then about 6 or 8, 9 packages. Again, review of the Biml. You see the 3 connections, and then the 8 or 9 packages. So now that the trick is how to generate Biml easily so that you can take advantage of this paradigm shift of using code and defining what you want via Biml to quickly generate your packages. All right, so let me go back to presentation. Okay, I had mentioned the Verigence. This, wherever you see the blue overline, this is where we align with the ecosystem of Biml products from Verigence. So they do have Biml Studio, they have Biml Online, they have Biml Framework, or sorry, Biml Flex, and then BimlExpress. BimlExpress is their free add-in, and I just demonstrated using it to generate the package. All of our logic is in SQL. We literally just say select tables, columns, et cetera, blah, 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 for XML, and that gives us the Biml. We output SSIS 2012, 2014, 2016, 2017 now. Biml does describe more than just SSIS. It will describe assets for SSAS. It'll describe databases and schemas, et cetera. But what we focus on is the generation of SSIS, because that's primarily the sweet spot for using Biml. Okay. If you were to use BimlExpress in the way that most people who work with Biml in the SSIS context, and you're not using a paid-for product such as Biml Studio, Biml Flex, et cetera, you would use the approach of BimlScript, and that's the example on the right. What BimlScript, which we just used, by the way, to generate the packages, can run off of pure Biml, which you would see on the left side, or alternatively, you can use BimlScript, which is on the right side. And you'll see on the right side that it is very much like classic ASP, where you have tags and then these code nuggets embedded within the tags. And when you generate this it would execute the code nuggets. And what it generally does in these code nuggets is reach into your database through a .NET object model to query schemas and tables and columns, and then use that in the construction of the full Biml. And that it works fine, but it does raise the bar to using Biml, because there are two very critical things you need in order to use BimlScript. You have to first understand the Biml tagging itself, and then you have to understand the object models that these code nuggets are invoking. And so for somebody to use it, and it's perfectly fine to use it, you really have to be well versed in the Biml tagging scheme and the .NET object modules, especially for connecting to SQL Server. So what we did instead is we said, why don't we just go ahead and put all of this logic in the database layer, and from the database layer do a select for XML and just create pure Biml. And that's really where we would diverge from the rest of the Biml ecosystem. At best that I know, we're the only ones that are fully database driven, where you don't need any .NET's coding skills. You don't have to understand the Biml script, tagging, XML schema. You simply need to execute stored procedures to generate the Biml. So that's really what we do. That's different from most. We provide two databases. These are free, and they do work independently. By the way, so BimlSnap V2, second version of this product, has all the project configuration information. In other words, connections, parameters, packages, along with metadata. And we collect the metadata, and we put this in the database for a couple of reasons. One, we want to have a stable version of the metadata, but two, we want to extend it. And I'll mention why we need to extend it just a little bit. It's mostly information schema, which of course is a T-SQL command. But what we want to know in the context of building a data warehouse, especially with dimensions, is what attributes make up your business keys and what attributes should be treated as type 1, type 2 in a Kimball dimensional model. So we extended just a little bit. We have a front end to do that, and you'll see that in just a minute. So that's the primary database. That, of course, as you just saw, will build SSIS packages. And then one of the options when building is you can say, put these packages on our runtime. And the runtime gives you a few features that the standard SSIS DB runtime in SQL Server does not give you, such as row counts, and built-in capabilities for rerunability. That means if you've got 100 packages, you're halfway through and it fails. Once you fix that failure, you just rerun it, and it'll pick up where it left off. So a couple of nice features built into the runtime framework. All right, so another demo. Let's take a look at how this works. So I'm gonna go into the database itself. It's BimlSnap V2, but I have a couple of another instance of it, which is samples, and I'll be working off of that database. But the database schemas are identical. I just have different projects in them. So let's look at the Biml connection table. If I look at this, I can see I have defined 16 connections. You see the name of the server, the database, the provider. You can have a custom connect string, that's an option. And then the connection expression, which is actually derived, it's a computed column. And so the naming scheme is simply the $project, $, in this first case, airline EDW, which is the actual connection name, _server for the server name. And then we would have one for the database, and then one for the provider. And so we reference that as pre-built project parameters for SSIS. So when we actually build it, we can tie it to this expression and marry it via parameters to whatever environment that you're working in, whether it's dev, test, prod, etc. So it's a pretty simple table, and we'll take a look at the table from SQL Server's perspective. Bimmel connection, there it is. And you can see, this last one is a computed column. So all you really need to do for a connection, which is really the starting point for about any SSIS package, is just give it a name, and then give it the name of the server and the database. You can do that from the front end, from the back end, really doesn't matter. But once your connections are defined, now you want to have the Bimmel equivalent of that. So here is a select statement, which is going to simply hit the same connections table, but it's going to give us the result for XML. And so we'll take a look at this, and you can see this is pure Bimmel. And this would give us every connection. Of course, we normally would not do that, but just for the sake of demo. And you can see the connection string it creates, the option to create a project, create package configuration, etc. But that's the Bimmel. Now that's a very simple one, so let's take it a step further, and we'll say, okay, how about configuring those particular connections? Well, here's the connection table you just saw a minute ago. Here is the parameter table. The parameter table, you can see, is actually generated from the name of the connection. So this is one thing that the front end will do for you. When you put in the connection name, it says, okay, you want airline_EDW. Well, I'm going to automatically create airline EDW database provider and server. Here's another computed column, and that will actually be plugged into the connection expression. So you can see how we're starting to build the package, starting with connections. Now we can configure it. And when you build it with BimlSnap, all of your connections are driven by expressions, so you can configure it via a parameter. Okay, so what does that select look like? Well, again, it's all in the database, so we'll just do a select, and then we will add the, actually it's a subselect for configuring that connection. So if we run this, you can see now a little more complex query, but it gives you the connection as well as the Bimmel that would make that connection at runtime resolve as an expression to pick up the proper server name, database name, and provider. So as a refresh, if we look at the Bimmel you saw just a minute ago, you'll actually see the identical code. There's your connection, the expression, and connection. So that really is the whole concept behind this. Just go ahead and define your connections, your parameters. We do this for packages as well in the database, then run a select for XML, tie it all together, place it into a big XML file, put it into Visual Studio, right click, and generate. So it's really the essence of what we do. All right, let's go back, pick up where we left off. Okay, if you go to our website, which is BimlSnap.com, and you'll see the links are at the bottom of this deck, and I'll be happy to share this deck with anybody who's interested. But it's www.BimlSnap.com. You can download. It's called the desktop version. It'll give you the backend database and a front-end application. And again, if you email me, say, hey Jim, I'm with SQL. Saturday night SQL virtual group, I'll give you a 6 month with the front end. Again, you can do everything from the back end as well. You need to have a BimlExpress, which is an add-in. It's a free download from Verigence. We do give you a runtime framework, which is a database that all the packages are tied to automatically when you build it. So it'll give you the GUIDs when it was running, the start time, end time, row counts, rerunability, error logging, etc. Here's the download link, BimlSnap.com. And there is our instructions on how to get started. Essentially, you get a big script for the databases, these two databases, and executable front end, which is a Windows .NET front end. Okay, one thing we do that's different from most is we use the ELT paradigm as opposed to ETL. The big difference there is when we don't do transformations in the data flow. From a data warehouse perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that because you're moving this data into a central state, really a staging location in your data warehouse. And then you have the full power of your data warehouse to do those transformations. And generally speaking, those transformations rely on data that's already in your data warehouse. Now you could do it, it's possible to do ETL, but what we found is that it's much faster, cleaner, maintainable, and cloud ready if you do the transformations in the database. So because of that, we do ELT, which is simply the data flow pipeline, just move the data as quickly as possible from your operational system into the data warehouse, then throw your SQL at it to do the transformations. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. Also, by doing ELT, we find that it dramatically reduces the difference in patterns that you would need to support. So there's only a couple of patterns, really two basic ones, which is the data flow, which is the pipeline from point A to point B, and then execute SQL pattern, which are your transformations for building your dimensions and your staging tables or your fact tables, your partitioning, all that is really done best just right on the data warehouse. Oh, in addition, if you push all of this information first from your source to the data warehouse, and that platform is an MPP system, such as Azure SQL Data Warehouse or Snowflake or any true MPP system. Now you've got all that scalability of the massively parallel processing platform to do your transformation. So when I say cloud ready, it really means cloud ready to take advantage of the horsepower of a cloud-based a data warehouse platform. Okay. So I had mentioned some of the transformations. I also had mentioned metadata management. You do get a metadata management system that comes with this. What the metadata management system really is a mini data warehouse or data mart within BimlSnap. So we look at metadata and we say, well, you know what? That's kind of like its own little data mart. And we use merge statements, and we built everything within this metadata management system. So you actually have a good example of what is it like to build a data warehouse with BimlSnap, because we've done it in this particular project. But in addition, it gives you a way to extend just a little bit what data you get normally from information schema. So what do you get from information schema in SQL Server? We get database names, column names, schema names, table names, etc. So everything you see here, except for the very last column, merge type, is automatically populated for you, because what we do is we run an SSIS project that was built using BimlSnap. In fact, that was the project I just generated. And when that runs, it goes to SQL Server, and it can also go to Snowflake, and it'll extract all the metadata. And then for creating a merge statement, which is the primary way that you would update your dimensions in the Kimball model, you simply need to add to that, how do you treat it within the merge? So you can see the first 5 columns here are a composite business key for the column type. In other words, if you combine server name, database, table schema, table name, column name, that uniquely identifies a column within your database metadata. Beyond that, we just need to know what's type 1, what's type 2. Type 1, of course, is it actually is a non-historical. It's the current view of it, but if it changes, you lose it in terms of your dimension. If the historical value is important, that's considered a type 2 attribute. So all you do is supplement the merge type, all this metadata for your a database with a merge type. Now we can automatically generate a merge statement to create the associated dimension table to go along with this dimension. And if you've ever had to write a merge statement supporting type 1, type 2, or really a combination, which is technically type 6, and if you have maybe 10, 50, 100 or more columns, you probably have an idea of how long that takes. And it literally, can take some, maybe a couple of days, and then you got to debug it, test it, make sure it's working. We generate that for you, within seconds, and that's a huge accelerator for building a data warehouse. And I'll show you how that's actually configured in just a minute. Okay, the runtime framework I had mentioned, it's called SSIS Data. Anybody who's familiar with SSIS knows there's an SSIS DB database from Microsoft. This actually complements it. So when you deploy this to SQL Server, you deploy it to the catalog, the SSIS DB database, and it's got GUIDs, and it's got projects and packages and environments, et cetera, et cetera. But what it doesn't give you are a couple of critical things, such as row counts. So if you're moving a lot of data, it's very helpful to know not just how long it ran, but how much data did it move. And also we facilitate automatic rerunability without using the checkpointing system, which is problematic within SSIS. So it extends the functionality of the standard catalog, and it integrates with all packages that BimlSnap generates. And you can see a list of the features it provides to you. It also feeds a Power BI dashboard. So if you, let's take a look at that. Here's a Power BI dashboard that hits the SSIS DB database. Now this is really test data, so it might not look all that intuitive, but this would be trending for different projects and packages, the number of row counts, the runtime and duration. That's at the project level. We have the package level report and package trending, so you can see individual packages. And you get this for free. This is just a desktop Power BI report. But the important thing is it connects directly to the database, which is called SSIS_data. And it just connects to primarily these tables: the batch, error log, execution log history. It's a compact a database, but you can see how the dots are connected here. BimlSnap builds for this runtime. The runtime gives you values, and now Power BI connects to that very same runtime database. So you get all that right out of the box. All right. Okay, project configuration. So now we're actually getting into the front end. So you can see a handful of projects. You give it the template. When you build, it will build it on a template. A lot of times I use no alerts in the development phase as a template, because I don't want, when an error occurs during development, to have emails generated, because I've got an event handler that will capture any error and send out an email. But when I'm ready to deploy it, I rebuild, just select a different template. In this case, it would be the standard template. And now I've got the identical logic, but with a more robust a template. And that's really the beauty of Biml, is you can recreate these projects and packages very quickly, and even change logic such as the level of functionality in the template at the time. We also have a no framework template if you don't want to, you want to just bypass the template altogether. All right, here's a sample package configuration. The name itself is a computed column, and you can see what it's doing is it's combining the type of package. So this is the pattern. The pattern is a data flow. It's adding this package qualifier so we can describe it better. This is really, mostly the name of it, or a category, if you will. And then it'll give us the name of the table that we're populating, both the schema name and the database name. We choose what connection we want to run it on, and then we just indicate, is this an expression or not? If it's an expression, then you can reference variables. Here's your destination connection, and then the schema name, database name. Do you want to truncate the destination? Do you want to use identity insert? And just by filling this out, you fully describe the package itself, and this goes into a database. So I mentioned before that you can work from the front end or from the back end. So if you instead wanted to work from the back end, you can see that we have a table that holds all the patterns. So this is the data flow pattern. We have a replication pattern, that's for change tracking, an execute process pattern, that's to shell out, execute script if you want to embed a script like a C# script in the SSIS, execute SQL. So these are all patterns. Well, if we look at one of these patterns, and you can see how it's populated, it's nothing more than a SQL table. Now we have customers who want to build 100 packages. And so instead of going into the front end and configuring 100 packages individually, they simply do an insert into this table. Now the insert into this table might be a little bit sophisticated, but you can kind of see a pattern developed here. This might be a good example, these four. We're just moving these four tables. They've got same package qualifier, the same destination, connection schema, but the table name is different. But you can see that it would be easy to do an insert, create these four packages with just a simple select, or it could be 100, or it could be 1,000. But the power now in being able to create an SSIS package by a simple insert or a multi-line insert into a table, you start to get the feel for the capability of what you could do with BimlSnap. And like I said, you don't have to have the front end. You can just work from the back end, and then when you do that, it is totally free. Data flows are probably one of the most popular patterns. The second most popular would be execute SQL. So from a data warehousing perspective, you get your data in, there's your pipeline to your data warehouse, and then you transform it with execute SQL. And we'll take a look at that as well. And you can see for execute SQL, you have to say, well, I want to run it on this connection. You can see package qualifier, essentially the name. You see the package name, this is computed, so it gives us the pattern and then the package qualifier. And then here's the query that you're going to run. And that really is all there is to it. You have to, of course, say, is it an expression or not? And do you want to return the row counts? If you say, yes, you want to return the row counts, then the very last statement needs to select back the number of rows that were affected. and that's how it determines the rows that were affected with each statement, and passes that back along to the front end. Just to give you a rough idea what that looks like, once you populate, for example, the data flow, what it will do is it'll feed each of these rows into a stored procedure that will create the associated Biml. And just so you have a rough idea what that looks like, here's the associated procedure to build the data flow. It is simply going to send in every column, and then here is the majority of the Biml that is used. And you can see what we're doing is we're plugging in the name of the connection, we're plugging in the query, we're plugging in the destination connection, we're plugging in the destination table, and that's all it takes to build a data flow in Biml. Now we stitch it together, so it actually is a part of the project, and it will run each package in its proper order. So there's a little bit more to it than that, but this is really a big part. And you can see this is of course a select for XML at the very end of building. Okay, pick up where we left off. All right, that's a data flow package configuration. Here's the money slide. This is, if you get this, you totally understand what's going on. You saw a minute ago the package configuration. Oops, let me go back. The package configuration was a data flow. That's fed into the stored procedure that you just saw a minute ago. That stored procedure is going to pull in essentially the package definition. It's going to pull in the template. Again, the template can give you row counts, alerts, etc. You can ignore. You could have a no framework template, which is bare bones. You could have no alert standard. So you choose the right template. You configure all your packages. Now you've got the package XML. This is for all the packages within a project. Now another stored procedure runs. It pulls in all of your connections. It pulls in all your parameters, and it outputs this project XML. The project XML is where we started. That's what we picked up, put into Visual Studio, generated, and got all of our package. So this is really end-to-end what's going on behind the scenes, at least from a conceptual level. Okay. Let me go back there. Okay, I had mentioned code generators. In building a data warehouse, there are two primary code generators. One is for your dimension tables. The other is for your fact tables. So we'll start with the dimension tables, and building the merge statement is usually the most time-consuming part of development for a dimension. You can see what we do is we leverage the metadata that you saw just a minute ago, and we say, well, what is the staging table where you have placed the business keys and all the attributes to create your dimension. Then you indicate what is your destination table or the dimension. So I've got a staging schema with a dim column. Again, that is our metadata dimensional model. So we have our own data mart for metadata, and so the definition of all our columns is one of our dimensions, and this is actually how we populate it. But this could be your customer dimension, it could be your product dimension, it could be your supplier dimension, whatever. But by simply configuring the code generator, it will build the merge statement for you, and you can determine the added columns, what names you want for that. Probably might be easier if I could show you the front end on that. Okay, so this is the actual front end. Metadata refresh. This is our data mart for metadata. We can see the connections that are in this package. Now I'll could run through these in a bit, but to keep the thread we were talking about, it was the merge statement. So here's an example of a merge statement for our column metadata. So let me double click on that. You can see this is an execute SQL pattern. So we've already brought our metadata in, but now I want to merge this staging table with the true dimension that houses the metadata for all of our columns. Notice the query itself is grayed out. I can't type this. The reason for that is we have a query configuration, which is dim table merge. And so these yellow boxes here are all the code generators that you get. And we're just going to use this dim table merge, which is the standard code generator for your dimensions. And if I open up the query a configuration screen, you can see the same values here. So my source table is staging dim column. Well, this, as I mentioned, this is actually embedded within BimlSnap. So this little data mart is actually right here. So here's my staging table for dim column. And so this is nothing more than information schema, which is a standard view in SQL Server. So that is my source. My destination has the same table name, but it uses a DBO schema. And so here is my destination. And you can see it has all the same columns except two critical differences. One is I have a surrogate key. So the Kimball dimensional model prescribes a surrogate key for all your dimensions. It is nothing more than identity insert column. So actually you don't have to populate it, just an insert into this table will assign a new surrogate key. If it's an update to the table, then of course you have no surrogate key, it's simply an update. Want to bring your attention though, after the last core staging column is row data source. And you'll see row data source up here, but then you have 5 additional columns. These are all the standard columns from the Kimball dimensional modeling that says, for these dimensions, you want to know what's current, when it was effective, when it expires, inserted, update, etc. If you don't like these particular names, you can assign your own names, and that is with the naming columns. I'm just using standard here, but I can use different ones or define my own set. And again, that's all this stuff ties directly back to a table within BimlSnap, which happens to be the very first table here. So you could also, from the back end, just insert whatever your naming scheme that you would like to use. Okay, and so this will build you the merge statement, and you can see what that looks like. And I'll just flip through here so you can see how much of a time saver it is to auto-generate this merge statement. And so if you have 100 dimensions, and you can build all those merge statements, really, that quickly just by clicking run. That could save you easily a couple weeks, a month, who knows? That's a huge time saver. Okay, let's go back. The other thing that's very time consuming are your fact tables in the event you have to partition them. So we automatically create the partition logic. All the partitioning is based on a sliding window. You can configure this as you want. Now, you have to, of course, create the table. We don't create it for you. And when you create the table, you've got to define your partition scheme and function. But if you can get that far, all you have to do is then say, here's how many day partitions I want, 366, really it's 367 because I'm going to jump forward one day. Otherwise, it would have started today, which is the 10th of November. But if I jump ahead today, it'll give me a partition for tomorrow or the 11th. It's optional. Then I've got 2 years, no, I think that's 20 years of monthly partitions, but you could set this to whatever you want. By doing that, it'll automatically create the partition, really it's the repartitioning logic. So, because every day that you move forward with this scheme of a sliding window means that the whole window slides forward. So what you have every day is a daily partition that rolls into a month. And every 30 days, you've got a month partition that would roll into the next month. And if you had a year, then once a year, or sorry, no, I take that back. Every month you'd have a month partition roll into a year partition. But it's a sliding window. So whenever you run the partitioning code generator, it'll automatically adjust that for you. And then it also gives you partition switching. When you just give it a certain date, let's say it was a week ago, and you want to switch out 7 partitions, it will give you the logic automatically to switch out those 7 so you can repopulate that from your staging table. So these are really the 2 hardest things to do in building a data warehouse, is the merge statement for your dimension tables and your partitioning statements for your large fact tables. So those are code generators that come out of the box. Okay, and this shows you an example of what the merge statement looks like. Okay, this is just a quick summary of what you get with BimlSnap. By the way, this is using the Node and Edge GraphDB tables within SQL Server, and the visualization for GraphDB objects within Power BI. But at the center, you can see BimlSnap. So you've got the framework, and this again, you can choose to use it or not, or only use it if you like that particular framework. It ties into a dashboard, gives you row counts, emails, alerts, etc. BimlSnap has its own metadata management system. And this is really just an SSIS package that extracts the metadata from whatever server that you want, lets you extend it with type 1, type 2 business keys, and then tracks changes to it. So if you ever wonder, well, what did my metadata look like last week, or was there a change to the metadata, it has a form for that. The package patterns, you get execute SQL, data flow, execute process, execute script. A lot of people ask me, well, that's fine for if you have a pattern that is what I need, but what if there's something you don't have a pattern for? And that does happen, from time to time. What I generally tend to do is execute process. One example recently is I had to have an SFTP data source. I didn't have a connection for it in BimlSnap, but I had a command line utility that I could shell to. So I execute process, shell to an FTP client, bring over those flat files, and then pick up with probably execute SQL or something else. In the same light, some people say, well, no, if I can't do it in a standard pattern, I'll write a script for it. And so you can put a C# VB.NET script pattern within a BimlSnap. We have a pattern for that. So there's a couple of ways you can extend it. If you're really good, you could actually extend the database itself. And just give you a rough idea what I mean by that. You could see that we have these tables that configure. So here's an execute process and the configurations for execute process. Here's the executable. Here's the arguments it'll send. It'll run it in this working directory, etc. I showed you the data flow. I showed you execute SQL. Well, notice these stored procedures, which I went through one of them, but they're actually the same ones. Here's the stored procedure for data flows. We walked through that, the stored procedure for execute process. But if you wanted your own pattern, it really is a matter of creating a new table with a new configuration, and then you would write in a corresponding stored procedure that creates the that Biml. So for execute SQL, for example, this is a logic, and there's a few more iterations than execute a data flow, but in the end, you would pass into the stored procedure the very same values. This is execute SQL. So you'd send in the connection manager, the package qualifier, or whatever you decided that you would need. And then at the very end, you output the XML. So that's this is a direct input query. So there's a few variations to it, but that's really all it would take in order to extend if you wanted your very own pattern. We don't have people doing it generally, but it's not that far of a reach if you really get good at the database to do just that. The metadata I had mentioned, the metadata manager. Well, actually, before you do this package that I generated is actually the package that refreshes your metadata. In the BimlSnap download, you do get a copy of this SSIS project. And so you can see that this is the very same project I've been walking through. So you can say we eat our own dog food. This whole package was built using BimlSnap, and it's a good example of what a project would look like when you go to populate a data warehouse. So in this case, we start out deleting the old metadata. We make sure we insert the name of the server. The parameters are right here. So the server name, it's actually alias. I'm calling the server dev, but I'm going to pull it from the SQL Server database. We also have one of these for Snowflake if you're working with Snowflake. So you give it the name, the server name, the database name. Actually, we'll walk through all databases. It will populate the BimlSnap database, and I showed you those tables just a minute ago. And it will record the row counts in the SSIS data database. So that particular project in BimlSnap is right here. By the way, as you define each of these packages, you have to tell it what sequence to run in. If the sequence is in a certain order, it will, of course, run in that order. If you give two packages the same number, it will run those in parallel. So you have both serial execution and parallel execution, and you can change it just by this sequence page right here. Or keep in mind, you can do everything from the back end. So you could also go into the project package. Sorry, where's that project package? And you could automatically assign the sequence number here as well in the back end. This is a project ID. You look at the project name. So we've got a total of 21 projects. This is, by the way, the only pointer is the project ID that allows you to rename a project without breaking anything. But everything then refers back to the project ID. So the project package table references the project ID and then the name of the package. but all you would update here is the sequence number if you want to change that from the back end. Okay, on the metadata, you run that SSIS package. It'll populate. Here's the dev server I mentioned. It's a SQL Server type. Here are all the databases on each of these services or servers that we're tracking. You don't have to extract all metadata, but if you want the metadata, you put a yes to extract. If you're going to use that database as a staging database, in other words, for your merge statements, here's where you staged all that information, then you would also indicate yes. So it's more than just extracting the metadata. We'll stage with that as well. So here's all the tables. Here's my staging tables. Again, this could be staging for customer, for product, etc. And finally, column types. So here on my dev server for BimlSnap, my staging tables for dim table, let's say. What makes a table unique? The business key would be server name, database name, table schema, table name. The rest of it, I'm using type 2, type 1. Type 2, in case I change something from a table to a view, I would have the historical history of that. And then finally, changes detected. So on this date, 10/4, I had these tables that were added, and these were the columns that were added. So it gives you a nice historical view because it's a type 2 dimension of changes that have occurred. Okay, let's go back to here. So some of the benefits, you get code reuse. It's an ELT paradigm. It is all database driven. You can do everything from the database. Gives you rapid data integration, and it also gives you documentation. The way that we do that is similar to creating Biml from select for XML. We also do select for HTML. And by doing select for HTML, we actually create from the database an HTML document. And so we've been looking at this metadata refresh. I'll click on that. It'll give you all of the packages in this particular project. If you want to see details on like the merge statement, it'll take you down, and now you can see all the code for the merge statement. So it's self-documenting simply because it's already in the database. It's very easy to pull out. In addition, if you're wondering, well, where is a certain column referenced, you're trying to come up with data lineage, everything is in the database. You can simply query the database tables and use a like keyword and search for a column name and find all the SQL that touches or references that particular column or table. Okay, and I mentioned the links. This first link is my blog. Here is the original project from Microsoft called called Project Vulkan. Again, Verigent inherited and took over this project. Interesting side note, their best customer is Microsoft. So Microsoft fully embraces the Biml paradigm, even though now it's not their product. They're very supportive of it. Here's where you download BimlExpress, which is the add-in. It's free, goes into Visual Studio, converts Biml, i.e. XML, into packages. Here's the website where you can download BimlSnap. We do have videos there. Maybe I'll jump over there to, let me jump over to BimlSnap.com. So if you go, you can, the download is here. So you get the framework, SSIS, you get this SSIS project to do the refresh, you get the metadata management, you get the BimlSnap desktop front end. It's really all we charge for, but like I said, send me an email, say you're with SQL Saturday Night Virtual Group, I'll give you a 6-month license. If you blog about it, do some social media, we'll just extend that for free indefinitely. And then to get started, we do have some videos. So this is how you get started creating a project, your connections parameters, creating your Visual Studio project from BimlSnap. All the patterns are documented, or most all the patterns are documented, and we continue to add these videos as well. There's a small FAQ section I need to build out a little bit, but everything is at the website. And then, yeah, that's also my blog for advocating ELT versus ETL. So that's all I've got, but let me go ahead and put the brakes on and see if anybody has any questions. I'll be happy to answer it at this time.
Yeah, we got a bunch of questions. And the first one is what version of SQL Server and SQL Azure will BimlSnap work with?
Yeah, I have used BimlSnap with SQL, Azure SQL Database. I don't know anybody who's used Azure SQL Data Warehouse with it, but we have lots of people who are using Azure and AWS Snowflake as a backend, a database. As far as the front end, the development database, which you see right here. Usually I call it BimlSnap v2, but there's nothing magical about it. From the front end, you just say, I'm going to connect to whatever a database. In this case, I go to samples, connect. But this particular database, BimlSnap v2, should run on I would recommend using SQL Server 2017. I do think it would work on 2012, 2014, but we haven't really tested it. We have tested taking BimlSnap. Again, this is a developer database. It's not your data warehouse. It's your developer database, and placed it in Azure, and then took the front end, which I think I closed it, but let me reopen the front end. And I pointed this to Azure SQL database, and that worked fine. So there's nothing in there in this that stops you from using it in Azure as a development database and having the clients point to it. Does that help?
Yeah, I suppose. In case someone missed this, do you have a paper that talks about how you came up to the 10% productivity improvement?
Well, it's a good question. That was actually provided to us by one of our clients who is moving, in this case, to Snowflake, a Fortune 500 company based in Georgia. And they told us that this got them to the cloud 10 times faster than any other approach that they've seen. But I think the secret to it is our code generators. These are accelerators, and so if you look at the packages, and I'll go ahead and open up. This is Snowflake. Go back to refresh to. So if you look at these code generators, we'll build the merge statements for your dimensions. We build the partition, fact table partition. Again, that'll take your fact table. It'll say what's today, how many daily partitions you want, monthly, quarter, year, and it builds that, and then the fact table switch. So when you want to load a staging table and then quickly switch out the data that's being replaced instead of having all these delete statements. That code is generally very intricate, time consuming to build, difficult to debug. So that's a huge time saver. The fact that you can share resources. So if I define in here a connection, and let's say this is, my, well, you use the framework database, SSIS data. By defining that, everybody gets to use it in all of your projects. So you don't have each developer who is potentially working in a different project and connecting to the very same data source, but doing it a little differently. And maybe they said, well, I want this to be expression driven. Therefore, I can configure it with a pattern. Here's how I'll do that. Everybody tends, if you have multiple developers, to start to use their own techniques, their own, expression approach, and it's not standard. So the fact that you build this repository, and then you can see over here on the right side, this is really your repository. And if I want to use any of these connections, I'll use try-health. You just push that over, and now in this project, you've got a connection to try-health that's been defined as a standard reusable coming right out of the repository. And by the way, by doing that, you're going to want to configure it at runtime, right? You're going to want to say, well, I'm in dev, now I'm going to promote it, and I'm in test. Well, it brought all the parameters. So if you look over here, at the same time I brought the connection, it brought my parameters because it knows I'm going to want to reference those. Now at runtime, when it builds the Biml, I will have parameters to say, here's my try-health server, database, etc. So, that the 10x, which is a huge performance accelerator, really has come from a client. But I can tell you, after all the data warehouses I've built, I wouldn't dream of trying it without using BimlSnap. And before BimlSnap, I was usually a part of a development team building the ELT or the ETL. Now it seems like one person is enough, no matter how large the data warehouse project is. So it's an accelerator, and also I think it's a huge cost saver. I hope that helps. But yeah, it's proven over time to be a dramatic accelerator.
Sounds good. So, are there plans to support for JSON?
Yeah. In fact, we have an interesting pattern. And it is driven by a couple of stored procedures. And the stored procedure, there's the bottom. So you download this, you're going to get these for free, and they're really kind of fun. This will do a JSON table export of all the tables in your database that you select into a JSON file. Not only the data for the table, but the table definition itself is in that JSON. And then this is called to import that. If you want to do all tables for a single select, that selects for JSON. And here, I'll show you that very quickly. So at the very end of this, you can see that this is, JSON, there isn't actually a JSON data type in SQL Server, but it's actually a var binary. But this is actually copying it to a file table. But you could also stream it back to SSIS, or you could use an open a query approach. The front end uses this, and so I can take this entire database, which is here. Let me show you. Export this database tables to a JSON file. And so on PC7, which is a server, my PC, this particular database, BimlSnap v2 samples, which is right here. So all these tables, I could say I want all of them. I could say only a select list. I can say all except for, so these are your options. And you click on export, and you tell it where you want to go. This will go to my desktop. And so that is a JSON file. And I could do this with any database, not just BimlSnap. But that's a JSON file. That's where it is, right there. Yeah. PM. I don't know if I have a JSON editor to look at it. I'm not quite sure how Notepad will work. I guess it's kind of big. I wouldn't do this with a really large a database. While that's going, after I've exported it, I can then import that very same file. So I would point to the file, and then I would say I want to have this as a destination. You can change that. You can point to some other database server. So yeah, we take interesting use of JSON, and so we do have a fun way to support that. But you can call that stored procedure. Yeah. So this is it's having a hard time rendering that, but that's your JSON.
Cool. So will the codes generated by USQL be supported?
Will the code generated by what SQL?
USQL.
I'm not sure what USQL is.
All right. George, are you still here? Give me a second. Let me see if I can unmute him. George, would you like to elaborate your question? We can hear you, but
yeah, it might be better to type in more of the question. We support T-SQL and we support SNOSQL for the merge statement generation.
okay. So he said the USQL is an extension for bigger data.
Okay, no, we do not support that.
So in addition to Power BI, do you have a template for Excel?
Well, we support Power BI, which is this for the SSIS database, so you can trend the runtime and the row counts. You could export this to Excel. Of course, that's a CSV, but that would also go into Excel. I don't know about the grids, if that would. Yeah, I guess maybe you could. I think that just would send the data, not the actual chart. But we don't go directly to Excel within this product.
Okay, I guess one last question. When you say it's cloud ready, what do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, the anything that we do on-prem SQL Server, we can do in the cloud. It's simply a matter of the connection. So as you define the connection, you would define it as a cloud. And in some cases, you may have to do a custom connection depending on whether you've federated Active Directory. But that custom connection could send you to a cloud a data source. The other thing I mean by that is we have the merge statement and connectivity options to Snowflake. And so the two database platforms that we support are Azure SQL Database. We have not done Azure SQL Data Warehouse, but it should be very similar. but we have done Azure and AWS Snowflake. So the SQL that we generate, and really you've got two pieces with an ELT approach. You've got the data flow, moving the data usually from on-prem up into the cloud, and then you have the transformations, which are nothing more than execute SQL. So the execute SQL would point to a data source that's in the cloud and would simply send whatever SQL that you want. Now, in this case, it doesn't really matter whether it's T-SQL or PL-SQL or SNOW-SQL or probably U-SQL. It is simply hitting that connection and sending the query to it, which is just a string of SQL. So by doing that, we're able to connect on-prem or into the cloud. If you've done anything with Snowflake, you'll know that there's their first class connectors from on-prem tend to be driven by Python. And so what we do for connecting and executing SQL on Snowflake is we use the pattern execute process that's a shell to then Python, and then Python simply connects to Snowflake and it sends the SQL. The key reason for that is Snowflake doesn't have the control flow of, say, of a T-SQL or a PL-SQL. So the Snowflake language itself gives you the control flow, like loops and cursors, iterations. And then embedded in that would be the actual SNOW-SQL statements, because they don't have a formal procedural language as a part of their SQL offering.
So you mentioned this works in Azure and AWS. What about GCP, Google Cloud Platform?
No, we haven't done anything with Google, so I don't think I could really provide any insight. I do know that Snowflake is moving to Google, so at that point in time, I could probably speak better, but I just have not used the Google Cloud platform at all, so I'm not quite sure what's involved.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions we have, and thank you so much, Jim, for spending
Sure.
your night to share the knowledge with us.
No problem. You're very welcome. I'm available if anybody has any questions. My email is jmiller@bitrax.com, or you can. And here, let me just quickly pop this up. So, or more generally, just info at. So if you have any questions, feel free to use either of those two email addresses, and I'll be happy to help out.
Wonderful. Yeah. Otherwise, if you guys couldn't remember Jim's email, you can always send it to our virtual group email, and then I'll forward it to Jim.
Okay, and if you want a copy of the presentation, I'll be happy to forward that as well.
Oh yeah, that would be great. That way I can just post it to our website for easier access for our members.
Okay, all right, Sarah, I'll send that to you after we hang up.
Okay, wonderful. And thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Jim.
Sure.
And thank you. Yeah, thank you everybody for attending. And this session is recorded. I'll post it to the YouTube, our virtual group channel tomorrow, and then you guys can access it.
All right. Okay. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.